Good evening and welcome to the Delaware Otsego Audubon Society's panel discussion about non-lead ammunition for hunting. I'm Peter Fouth, an ornithologist and conservation biologist at Hartwick College and a volunteer counter for the Franklin Mountain Hawk Watch in Oneonta, New York. The goal of tonight's discussion is to provide you with information about the negative effects of lead ammunition on wildlife, particularly federally protected bald and golden eagles. We also wish to alert you to the potential of being exposed to this toxic metal if you consume significant amounts of wild game killed with lead ammunition. Our hope is that the information we review will encourage you to consider using non-lead ammunition this hunting season to help reduce this globally recognized environmental hazard. The negative effects of lead from ammunition are real and have been well documented in more than 600 scientifically reviewed papers since 1975. Environmental exposure to lead from hunting ammunition does not occur just in the United States, but also occurs in the United Kingdom, Sweden, Canada, Argentina, Japan, South Africa, and elsewhere throughout the globe. A wide variety of birds have ingested or been poisoned by lead from hunters' ammunition. In North America, for example, species that have ingested or been poisoned by lead include the bald and golden eagles, great horned owls, sandhill cranes, California condors, American woodcock, mourning doves, and even yellow-rumped warblers. Lead ammunition used for game hunting is the main source of lead poisoning in large birds of prey, particularly those that scavenge in the winter, like the bald and golden eagles, two species the Delaware Otsego Audubon Society is particularly concerned about. What's the evidence of this lead poisoning? Blood lead concentrations in wildlife before the start of hunting seasons are measured to be lower than the levels during and after hunting seasons. Wildlife living in areas with more hunting activity have higher concentrations of lead in their blood and tissues. And lead from wildlife tissues contain chemical properties that match the lead used in ammunition, suggesting that it's the ammunition and not other sources that are causing the ingested lead in these wildlife. Eagles ingest lead from the consumption of discarded entrails of the game shot by hunters, from wounded game that are easier to capture, and from carcasses of game that were wounded and eventually die. In the US, where non-lead ammunition has been required for waterfowl hunting since 1991, duck and goose mortality from environmental lead exposure has noticeably declined. The same reduction in lead exposure will result in terrestrial wildlife if enough informed and concerned hunters use alternatives to lead ammunition. There is, of course, another reason why we hope hunters make the switch to non-lead ammunition. Exposure to lead in humans is also toxic, particularly to developing children. The lead from tiny ingested ammunition fragments can be converted to soluble ions and absorbed in the body. Cooking the lead-contaminated meat with acidic ingredients may actually increase its uptake in the body. The program tonight is not about your constitutional right to own firearms or the politics of hunting. Indeed, all our panelists are pro-hunting. Rather, we hope to provide you with useful information about the effects of environmental lead exposure due to the use of lead ammunition. Each of tonight's panelists will introduce themselves before making a brief presentation. During those presentations, we encourage you to submit any relevant questions about the information that you hear using the question and answer button, the Q&A button in Zoom. Please feel free to indicate a panelist to answer the question if you wish to do so. We will do our very best to answer your questions that are submitted with the Q&A button at the end of our program, after all our panelists have presented. So let's go ahead and get started with our first panelist. All set, Michael?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Okay. I need to get permission to start sharing. There we go. Okay. There. So to begin with, I want to say that I am not an expert in ballistics or anything, but the way I started was as a volunteer studying golden eagles, wintering here in the Catskills back in 2013. And basically what we did is we set out bait, we trap them, put transmitters on them, draw blood, and do some other tests. And this was the first eagle that we caught. You see the transmitter on the eagle. The bird is released. So this particular bird traveled to southern Delaware County. You can see some of you are familiar with that area, Callicoon, Hancock's down near there. And it stayed in the same place for almost 2 weeks. Then we got a call from the folks that monitored the unit, and they told us that they thought she was down. We went down to look for her, and on this farm, we met the farmer whose property she was last, the last position she was on. Said he was happy to let us go on his property. He loved eagles. And he said, as a matter of fact, he had called DEC the week before because there was a bald eagle just sitting along the side of the road. And DEC went down, picked that eagle up, and it was brought to Missy Runyan, who you will hear from later. And that eagle had a blood lead levels of 70, which is high as the unit measures, and ended up dying of lead poisoning. So what we found in that area looking around is that there was a canned hunting facility bordering the farmer. Some of those pigs got loose. The USDA and DEC baited them in. They shot a bunch of them and then left them in the field, and the farmer was supposed to bury them. Well, the farmer, along with me, this was a learning experience for me, thought those bullets would just go right through the pigs. They only weigh 30, 40 pounds. But it turned out that is not the case at all. And that's what started me on this campaign to demonstrate to hunters the implications of using lead ammunition. I got home, I started shooting into water jugs and ballistic gel, and this is what happens. Those copper jacketed bullets are traveling so fast, they actually explode into hundreds, literally hundreds of tiny pieces. And unfortunately, these are the bullets that most hunters use. I would say probably 90% of hunters use. And looking at the speed of the bullets, you can see how that bullet will shed more of the contents, the lead have you, the faster that thing goes. That's why once upon a time, when we were using muzzle loaders, bullets were going very slow. It wasn't as big of an issue with lead. And looking at a deer carcass that was x-rayed, I know some of you have seen this photo before, shot with a copper jacketed bullet. You can see those tiny fragments, and the point of this is that you can see how far back they're going. Some of you that do hunt, you can see there's your inner tenderloin back here hitting into the hind quarters. Most of the front quarters are going to be contaminated out there. And if you think about this x-ray and think about the carcasses, the gut piles, the scraps left out in the fields, and I think in New York State alone, over 200,000 deer are shot with rifles every year. And a vast majority of those are using lead ammunition. So that's a lot of lead going out into the environment for these scavengers to feed on. Who's eating that? Well, eagles. And Missy's going to speak more about the effects of lead on wildlife, but it only takes a tiny bit, something equal to the size of a grain of rice, a couple number 6 shot to be lethal to an eagle. I spoke to the gentleman from U.S. Fish and Wildlife to get his permission to use this photo, And he said literally they rack them and stack them, and it starts a few weeks after deer season starts. And especially if the waterways are frozen. So what are the alternatives? What can we do about this? There are alternatives, and the best that I've come across is solid copper. Barnes has a great video on how they developed this monolithic copper bullet some 40 years ago in the early 80s to hunt big game in Africa. They didn't care about the lead. They wanted something that would work better. They don't fragment. These bullets don't fragment, so they maintain their mass, and so doing so carry their energy on much better. Not very clear here, but you can see this. This is a ballistic gelatin shot with the top is a core lock. The bottom is the Barnes bullet. You can see the X-ray of the lead off in the ballistic gelatin. Same thing here with the nozzler, probably traveling a little bit faster on here, and huge amount of lead. And again, this ballistic gelatin is supposed to represent flesh. This isn't hitting any bones. This is just going into flesh. So even if you're shooting a deer in the hindquarters, something like that accidentally, all that lead is going to be shed into your venison. I want to finish up with a study that was done in Minnesota. They shot 8 deer broadside with sharpshooters, and they shot 72 previously euthanized sheep. And what I want you to look at here are the velocities. These first, let's see, 4 rounds are lead. This Winchester XP is kind of a special case. Its lead is bonded to the copper. So if you can't get copper, that's the next best thing to use. And here's your Barnes, a couple of muzzle loaders. These are both lead. And then of course the shotgun slug is also lead. And look at what was retained by the bullets. And this I've found, and if you go to something like a 223, a 243, this was shot with a 308, by the way. You go to something a little faster, heading upwards of 4,000 feet per second, you're going to have even less retained. I had some 223s that were retaining about 25% of their mass. So all this stuff that's lost is going to be lead that's off in that carcass. Next slide, I wanted you to look at the number of fragments. You can look at the average number of fragments here. Look at the maximum from that nozzler, almost 500 fragments in that, it was in that sheet. Oh, and I wanted to mention all these were shot in the chest. They were not shot, you know, so they're hitting major bones other than the ribs. The last slide in this study, I wanted you to look at the distance that these particles end up traveling from where that bullet was. 14 inches on a white-tailed deer, that's a long ways into that deer and could be ruining a lot of your meat, certainly putting a lot of lead inside that deer. As many of you know, it's difficult to find ammunition these days. Tom, who's going to be your next speaker, said, when I told him I couldn't find ammunition, he said he thought Walmart still had some in Oneonta. I drove up there. All the Winchester rounds here, plus these Federals, I just purchased at Walmart. The Winchester was $23 a box for any of them, the 30-06 through the 243, same price, and the shotgun shells were $6.47 a box. The cheap bullets are going to be just a little bit less than that. It used to be that the lead was twice as expensive. You're looking at $40 a box. The prices come down. But right now, all ammunition is hard to find. All right, and the last thing I want to mention here is that if you want more information, Hunting with Non-Lead is the site to go to. They've got a ton of information on there, how to find ammunition, the manufacturers that produce the ammunition. It's the best site to find out anything about hunting with non-lead. And if you do, or when you do switch, make sure you practice before you go out. These bullets invariably are lighter or longer if you're shooting the same grain weight, and they will most likely shoot different. They'll group very well, but they will probably shoot different than the core locks that you're using. So that's it for me. I'm gonna pass it off to you, Tom.
Okay, I need Susan to put up my first slide since I'm not screen sharing. Hi, everyone. My name's Tom Salo, and hunting is one of my passions. Raptors are another. I've been hunting since 1969, and I've been engaged in raptor research since 1989. I also have a Christmas tree farm, and there's some pictures of Christmas tree damage there. And because I have this damage, I get these extra doe tags. They're called DMAP tags over here, Deer Management Assistance Program, and they allow me to shoot extra does or give these tags to other hunters to shoot extra does. So we shoot a lot of does here. This is a picture of the back of my truck. That's my More Hunting, Less Lead sticker along with some of my raptor stickers. My children grew up with their primary source of red meat being venison, and all the deer my children ate in their lives up until they grew up was shot with lead. So it's not something I would do now, but it's something that I did do. Susan, next slide, please. As I mentioned, we shoot a lot of deer for control. There's 7 deer hanging in the barn. Almost every one of them is a doe. We eat a lot of venison. These are all opening weekend photos from my property. My awareness of lead poisoning in raptors came about in the 1990s. And I learned about Barnes TSX bullets. I learned that they had been developed to be a better bullet, but were non-toxic. And I started using them shortly after 2000. And by 2005, everybody who hunts on my property was using non-lead ammunition. Next slide, please. So we're discussing how eagles acquire lead. Michael was showing you slides from a research project that he was involved in, but these are slides from my property. And that top photo is a golden eagle on the carcass of the first deer I shot last season. This is on November 20th, right around the time rifle season opened. And during rifle season and shortly thereafter, we have large numbers of golden and bald eagles in the upper Susquehanna region. And there's a lot of gut piles and a lot of carcasses out there. Now this carcass had been butchered, but still they'll do the same thing on another carcass if it hasn't. The lower photos, the red-tailed hawk on the right was on the gut pile from the last deer I shot last year. And that's another red-tailed hawk on a different gut pile from a couple of years ago. So we know these birds, as Peter Fouts said earlier, there's all this evidence that points to this. We know there's 200,000 gut piles from deer killed with rifles each year in the state, and we know these birds will feast on that. Next slide, please. So this is another X-ray. This is from a research project that they X-rayed 20 gut piles, and 90% of them contained lead. So 18 of them had lead in them. 50% had more than 100 fragments, and 25% had greater than 200 fragments. And if you think about it, if you fragment something, you increase its surface area. And this becomes exponential. And by the time you get up to 200 or 400 fragments, so it's 450 fragments in this gut pile, you have a huge amount of surface area for stomach acids to work on to move that lead into the bloodstream. Now, this gut pile was shot with a 270 Winchester, which is the same caliber I use, but I use a solid monolithic copper bullet. So if the gut piles that I'm leaving in the woods don't have any lead in them. So last year, opening morning, I shot a deer. While I was field dressing that deer, there was an eagle circling over my head at twice the tree height. I dragged the deer home, I skinned it, I hung it, skinned it, had lunch, went back out for the afternoon, and there was 2 eagles sitting in the trees above the gut pile during my afternoon hunt. So they're very attracted to these things. Next slide, please. When birds feed on these carcasses and gut piles and they consume these fragments of lead, if the bird dies quickly, they'll still have the fragments in them. If the bird persists, the lead may pass through the bird. So when Missy gets a bird to rehabilitate, she can speak to this later, it may have no lead in it. It might, but it may not. If it didn't get enough lead to kill it quickly, it maybe was poisoned a week or two earlier before somebody finds it. So these are photos that were taken from dead eagles, the lead that the DEC Wildlife Health Unit found in those birds. Next slide, please. So talking about performance, here we kill on average 4 or 5 deer a year with rifles on my property. I wish I could shoot more. I have a lot of places around me where no hunting's allowed, the deer know where to hide. So conservatively, we've killed about 70 deer with non-lead bullets, and we had excellent results. If you've ever had trouble following a blood trail, copper bullets almost always pass through the animal. So you have an exit wound that adds to your blood trail. So I recommend them, as Michael said, with accuracy. We find them as good as any commercial bullet. No problems with that, and we find them extremely effective at killing deer. Next slide, please. So hunters can choose how they spend their dollars. Michael covered some of this. Copper used to be considered just premium bullets, and they were expensive. Even though they were expensive, it only cost me a couple of dollars more a year because I don't shoot a lot of rounds. I don't use a semi-auto. I shoot 1 round at each deer. Now with prices for copper having dropped, $22.83 locally in the big box store for common calibers, a little more for some of the more hard to find calibers. It's not an economic argument. It is in some ways an availability argument. Right now, it seems like whenever there's stresses in society, ammunition disappears off the shelf. Right now, ammunition's a little hard to find. I've been in several stores in the last couple of weeks, and the small shops have a lot more ammunition, but the small shops are more expensive. Michael mentioned Walmart. I wasn't going to mention Walmart because I didn't want to endorse them, but I might as well just acknowledge that it's Walmart. I've been in Walmart twice, once about 2 weeks ago and once about 6 weeks ago. And both times they had an assortment of copper ammunition in different calibers. It's changing. In Newsweek 2 days ago, there was an article that ammunition manufacturers are working at full capacity and they're shipping regularly. So there is ammunition coming into the stores. If you want this ammunition, you can find it. You may have to work a little bit at it, make some phone calls. If you can't find it in the stores, you can order it online and have it shipped in New York State to a federal firearms dealer. Usually they'll charge you a few dollars for receiving it for you. So I'm done, and we can move on to the next speaker. I believe that's Missy, right? You're muted, Missy. You have to unmute.
About that. Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
We're good?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Missy Runyan from FFF Wildlife Center, and I'm wildlife rehabilitator. Most of these birds, as everybody speaks of, does come here. Um, and where it says just in the title there, any lead is too much. On the next slide, you'll see this small fragment. It's an X-ray, and that tiny fragment there was actually that's just about all they need before they're flat out. Like Tom was saying before, it's if they don't ingest enough to actually self-implode and die while they at the scene of, or the carcass where the gut pile, then they will consume some and go weeks. Now this happens to be a small fragment in which the eagle did make it a few weeks, and sorry, this was a turkey vulture, and he did make it, but it actually the next slide you'll see he was somewhat catatonic, unable to move his legs, his wings, unable to breathe, and well, there's an eagle here as well, and just that small bit of lead kind of brings them to it where we're battling respiratory system, we're battling circulatory system, we're battling organ failure, and it's just that small fragment. So it's not as if they come in and this is just something we can treat. There's no guarantee that we'll be able to combat all of the different side effects that go beyond it. Can we stop the immediate death? Sometimes, but whether or not the long-lasting effects, whether it's the canary in the coal mine type thing, we may be able to stop them on the bird, but human consumption, the effects of long-term developing kids, it's the same idea. There's a lot of things that where this becomes a politicized issue or political issue, and it's not. It's simply the side effects are long-lasting. Not every eagle or bird. I mean, we get everything from pileated woodpeckers and blue jays, red-tailed hawks, and Cooper's hawk. We had a Cooper's hawk that tested so high, he basically died within a day, but he was just as high as an eagle for lead testing. And everybody said, well, don't they eat birds? And the juveniles scavenge on whatever keeps them alive. So whereas a supplemental protein, so your favorite woodpeckers, your chickadees, all of those are still on these same gut piles as we go into the winter. Most of them die because of the system. We don't get a lot of them, but we do test here at Triple F. I test everything that shows a neurological response because of the fact that, especially during hunting season, because of this reason, because of lead, and then we combat from there. But you can fix certain symptoms when the vision starts to go, and then you realize that it's causing kidney failure, liver failure, everything from nerve paralysis, where they look fine, they act fine, but they can't walk. And you'll see in the next slide, the next two slides actually, that just that small fragment of lead will actually bring them into a catatonic state, where the eagle is unable to, in my arms, he's unable to move, wings, legs, none of the above. And that's a small fragment. Like the gentleman was saying before, it's half, more than half come in without lead in their gut. I think out of the last, let's say 20 birds, maybe one or two, we've actually found lead in the digestive tract. This is all the after effects, and birds, people, it's the same idea. To say we can fix it, well, for right now, we can kind of clean up the mess that it's leaving behind, at least for the ones we can find. I can't imagine the amount we don't, but it's an easy fix. I've carried a firearm for 21 years, and I shoot copper. I do for dispatching animals, so we can leave them out there, and the argument that I've gotten all these years were the cost. And if I told you the cost of rehabilitating an eagle, which everybody is for, if I told you the cost of rehabilitating an eagle to the cost of the one round it should take you to take out a deer, which if it takes you more than that, where you kind of should go home and practice a little more. But the cost is trivial compared to the amount of pain and suffering you inflict on wildlife. There's everything from fox and things like that, where we've tested to try and get lead levels even on fox because of the fact that it's a trigger for something else, whether for sarcoptic mange or compromising the immune system. But mammals don't present the same way as a bird does. So whereas it's easy to see when you see something like a bald eagle in this slide, whereas a mammal, which is what people are, you can't see the slow effects from things like hair loss to circulation problems and whatever. And for those, I have friends that have been hunting for years, hunting big game for years, small game, and did nothing but consume lead, as far as right down to a spittoon on the table spitting out lead shot. And you go through a year's worth of health problems, and the argument is people who they said, well, I don't understand. I've been hunting all my life, and I'm the epitome of health. But are we though? It's just that mammals present differently. So we could hope for the easiest way, which would be to get more hunters and those to just take out lead from the equation, and then the effect on wildlife would be astronomical. I mean, these cases take, for one bird, this case here took almost 8 months, and then they go into a rigomus, and we get all the way to these points, and then I'm not sure if I have the flight cage slide attached because I'm not that organized. Is it there, Susan? Oh, another catatonic bird. This guy couldn't even stand up. Everybody's affected differently. Every eagle is affected differently. But right down to the inability to swim, and right to the end they're doing well, and then all of a sudden they can't fly, they can't balance around water. Well, how do you let an eagle go that can't do those things? And it's all the effects of lead. So, and there's a lot of work ahead to save these birds. And I mean, we have tried to make sure, we're trying to study it now, the long-term effects, and that we do it, that they are able to help in some way, shape, or form. But the easiest fix would be to just shoot a copper bullet, and the difference would be astronomical in the amount of work, and the work for me isn't even the issue. The amount of pain and suffering and dead birds out there would lighten that load immensely. Thank you.
Okay, I will go next. Let's see, I have to wait for the sharing to quit. Here we go. All right. 1 second here. Okay, so I'm the nurse in the crowd. My name is Londa Palmer, and I am one of the board members at Delaware Otsego Audubon Society, and I've been a nurse in our community for about 38 years. I'm also a farmer's wife and a farmer here in Delaware County. I'm imagining any of the hunters who are participating tonight like that picture quite a bit. That was taken outside of deer season. And I will say that the hunters probably are quite pleased to see these deer, but I can tell you my farmer, not so much. So one of the things we wanted to discuss tonight or bring to everyone's attention is really from a public health perspective as far as lead impacting humans. You know, when we think about hunting, there's a lot of really good benefits that come from hunting. Physical activity, hunting and walking and hiking and climbing hills. I was thinking about this today. We have a number of hunters that come to our farm, and some do, you know, they're on foot, they're really working hard physically, and others jump on their four-wheelers and up over the hill they go to their tree stands. But I think one of the other benefits of hunting is really a quality of life issue where you're out in nature, you take time to kind of like get rid of all the noise that's going on in the world, and you can really focus. I compare what I do in nature. I'm not a hunter, but I love to play with photography. My shoot's a little bit different than the hunter's shoot. And I find that when I'm really focused in on what I'm seeking, I can kind of slow myself down, my heart rate down, my breathing down, my blood pressure is probably coming down as well. So there's a lot of good, healthy benefits to hunting. There's also the risk. This is a photo or a graph from the World Health Organization that talks about how lead is toxic to the body, and we've known that for centuries. Typically we think of lead exposure through occupational exposure, water from lead plumbing and paints in old houses, petrol additives. But the bottom line is any exposure to lead is not good. And there is some argument, and I did a little research trying to figure out, what's the acceptable amount of lead in the body. And what the research is showing is that no acceptable level of lead is good for the body. When we talk about where else we get lead exposure from, one of the things that's been discussed is really just how it's coming into the body, whether through ingestion or sometimes even respiratory. When the gun is shot and the powders are coming back, that can also be another way of lead exposure. It impacts different parts of the body, soft tissue organs like your brain, kidney, liver, reproductive systems. Children tend to uptake lead much more and much higher levels than the adult would. And the lead lasts in the system for a very long time. Lead is transported throughout the system by our blood system. Half-life of the lead in soft tissue organs is about 30 days. So that's, getting to a level that's bringing it down from its highest point down to still having half the amount in the body. It's excreted through feces and urine and hair. And when I read about hair, I was like, really? And what happens is, our blood system is, feeding our hair follicles. And then when we shed our hair, that's when we're excreting lead through our hair. Transfer of lead to the bone is really one of the more problematic. I'm just going to skip forward to this to show you this X-ray areas, because when lead has entered the bone, it can stay in the bone system for decades. So when you think of a child perhaps eating lead, and Tom, this is not meant to scare you, but if a child has ingested lead over periods of time, that lead accumulates in their bones, and it can last for 20 to 30 years where it's still in the system. When we are talking about accumulation, I think this is probably the area where it's mostly putting people at risk. When we ingest lead, this is a picture of a nice piece of venison, and you saw the pictures of lead, that gets absorbed more quickly because it's in the gut system. And when the meat has been ingested, that's when there is more complication, especially for children. They are at risk for cognitive and behavior issues. If a woman who's pregnant is eating meat that has any kind of lead exposure in it, then they too are exposing the fetus. and there can be some neurological damage as well. So when you think about lead in any form that's entering the body, and we're thinking about this particularly in relation to ingesting any big game meat that has any kind of lead particles in it, we have to think about the vulnerable populations, and that would be our children, pregnant women, women who are thinking of being pregnant, and also the other word of caution I would put in here is I know that many hunters offer their meat to food pantries, and vulnerable populations are going to food pantries to gather food. So I think if there is contribution of deer meat to a food pantry, it really needs to be verified that it is lead-free. So there's a lot of information. There are good studies that are out there and available. I looked at a couple, and the main takeaway for me was any amount of ingested lead is not good, and our bodies need to be free of lead, and we need to do what we can to be good stewards, not only of nature, but also of those that are going to be exposed to any lead from lead ammunition. So, all right. And I think we're going back to Peter to see if we have any questions.
Yes, that's correct. So thank you, panelists, for those informative slides and information. And we do have some questions. We encourage others to use that Q&A button and type in your questions for us. We're happy to try and answer them as best we can. So one question that we have is that this is the first that I've heard of turkey vultures being affected. How do their stomach acids affect the lead? Missy, I don't know. Do you have a feel for what happens with turkey vultures in particular?
Generally, with turkey vultures, we find them. The misconception is that they're usually hit. Like 90% of the time, we can find them right by the carcass. That they were, because they're even botulism cannot survive a turkey vulture. Their stomach acid is just so strong. It's one of the most boring fecals I've ever looked at, and I keep testing everyone for the last 15 years, so I'm going to prove it wrong. But because their stomach acid it breaks it down so quickly that it's always an acute toxin. It always happens fast for vultures. So most of the time we find them right near the deer carcass, or whether it's a nuisance woodchuck that was shot and they're consuming. Turkey vultures are probably right up there with eagles because they scavenge on the same. They tend to follow one another when there is a score there. But turkey vultures are probably one of the most affected species out there as far as death from it, because we just always they don't get the 2-week mulligan of digestion and things that other species survive with, depending on the amount. It breaks down so fast. It usually paralyzes them quickly, where they look like they're about to take off. But that's where we have the what came first, the chicken or the egg. Every case since I've been dealing with lead and studying lead and researching the effects on some of these birds. Now I question every hit by car case that comes in. Was it hit by a car first, or did it get hit by a car because of lead? And whenever we test them and they're high, and vultures are one of those cases that it's always the hit by car is always secondary. That they're scavenged most of the time from scavenging and lead poisoning first.
Yeah, I actually read a study about golden eagles that had sublethal doses of lead, and they were flying lower and less frequently than birds Absolutely. That didn't have.
Well, I watch it. I'm sorry. I've been studying that because of the flight cage. That's the whole reason we put the pond and the cameras into my flight cage, was for the lead toxic eagles in particular. And when we would talk, she was talking about the half-life of lead, And that is when, when it's in the soft tissues and it can kind of reinfect the bird even at post-chelation. And that's one of the studies we do now is post-chelation. And everything's great. We retest, the numbers are back low again, and then they're put into the flight cage and they're never released. As of late, the last couple of years, they don't release anything for a couple of months when the numbers are so high when the lead numbers are high or low, depending on how it is. But the first thing they do is stay perched, and they will no longer go by the water. And I can see the effects of lead coming back out where they eat nothing. Here we x-ray foods. We don't use wild foods. I don't use fresh caught fish. All the fish that we use for our lead toxic eagles are fed from the hatchery so that we're not reinfecting the animals here. And they're tested as soon as and it's usually between 28 and 45 days that I'll see the same eagle that showed low between that 28 and 45 days ago. It starts to seep from the soft tissues back into the bloodstream with no extra lead ingested, and he's sick again. So it takes, and sometimes it takes 3 or 4 times where you can tell their vision is starting to go. And the first thing that does go is the lead alters their vision. So they fly low because they're in my opinion, because they can't tell me and we don't have those superhuman glasses. But my opinion is the patterns that they fly low in the flight cage over the water without stopping at the water is their peripheral vision is the first to go. So it's kind of tunnel vision that remains, which explains all of the hit by cars and situations like that when post-lead ingestion.
Peter, if I could add one thing that about the vultures, California was the first, well, actually the only state that has banned lead ammunition for any hunting. It started in 2013. It was fully implemented in 2019. And the reason for that, the entire reason is because of the condors.
The California condor, yeah.
Yeah, we were down to I think there were 22 condors left in the entire world flying free. Just 22 in 1987. And they said, we got to do something because we're going to lose all our wild condors. So they trapped them all. And now I don't remember, some of you probably know better, but I think we're up to something like 400 free flying condors. But the biggest obstacle to them coming back is the lead and ammunition, because the hunters are the ones that are feeding them, whether they're shooting carcasses, shooting deer, or whatever they're shooting out there, and that's what they're eating on. And so I know there's a lot of controversy over the ban in California. Arizona has gone a different route and gone to a voluntary approach. And I was just speaking with Chris Parrish. I think that he said that the hunters in Arizona are somewhere up to 80% of them are using non-lead ammunition. So it's a different approach, but I just wanted to bring that up as you mentioned the vultures here. And yes, they are certainly very susceptible.
Thank you. We have another, I guess not a question, but a comment, and I'll read that to you and any panelists that might want to add their opinion, feel free to do so. The comment is, watching eagles feed on carcasses is why I made the switch to non-lead, but New York gun laws didn't make it easy. The ability to order ammo online is critical for people who cannot find non-lead ammo in their local stores, but the SAFE Act prevents it. I actually got into reloading this year because I can have all of the tools and components to load thousands of rounds of ammo shipped right to my door, but I can't buy a single box of factory loads and have it shipped the same way. Not allowing online ordering of ammo is complete nonsense, and we all need to speak up about it. So I don't know if hunters want to.
Yeah, I agree completely. When I started hunting with non-lead, I was just purchasing it online, shipped to the house, and it was very easy to get. And now I have to be calling shops. What do you have in stock? Will you special order it for me? or do I have to pay a fee if I have it online order to you? So absolutely, the SAFE Act was written, it was drafted very quickly, passed in the middle of the night, and I wish we had had some opportunity to have input there. So on the good side, there was an attempt to categorize copper bullets as armor piercing and ban them at a federal level. And Raptor advocacy organizations actually stopped that so that copper is still available. Any other comments? That's what I've got.
Well, I mean, the reality to say the SAFE Act is of course, that situation does make it a bit of a annoyance, if you will. But although I don't hunt, I know most of you who do, you have a caliber you've been hunting with likely since you were in high school. And if your kill shot is a 270, then I mean it's not that difficult to plan ahead. You know, you plan your doe urine, and we have this all planned. Your clothes are hanging from trees months before hunting season.
Mm-hmm.
So the caliber that you will be putting into the animal and leaving the gut pile with you secure months in advance, and whatever you're plinking at the range with is still lead, as long as you know that's your choice as far as. But to get your caliber for hunting, I mean, I still think if we're going on a volunteer level, these are things that are we can work around for now, you know, and those who. Nothing better than having a bunch of raptor enthusiasts and specialists helping to change the SAFE Act when hunters and gun enthusiasts need that. We'll be happy to help, as long as it's a give and take situation. Save a few birds, and sure, we'll help you with the SAFE Act. It's a win-win.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have a few more questions. So our next question is the following. Is there any alternative to lead besides copper that is cheap and doesn't cause negative effects to species that may ingest particles of that specific metal? Tom or Michael, I don't know.
Well, I'll go first, and I'll let Michael talk. And my quick answer is no, not in center fire bullets. There's bismuth, which is used in heavy shot and waterfowl shot, but it's not suitable for high-speed bullets. And so really, no, but we're seeing copper prices very close to cheap lead bullet prices. Michael?
Yeah, I was going to say basically the same thing. There isn't a good alternative to copper. The bismuth you mentioned, and I've seen people using brass. That's another, but again, those are really expensive. Now, you mentioned the shot, I think you mentioned the shot loads, and the high-speed steel and things like that now they're tremendous rounds that people are using for upland game, and they're not lead and not very expensive. They've come a long way since the federal ban in 91, I think, is when the feds banned hunting waterfowl with lead ammunition. And a lot of people complained back then, but they've come a long way since then.
Thank you. Some more questions for us. The birds that are killed, where are their bodies discarded? And are the remains able to infect other species that may feed upon them?
Well, they need to
Missy,
be found. The thing is,
Well,
go ahead, Missy.
oh, I'm sorry. The birds that are killed, you mean were not found? If that's the case, then if there's still lead in the digestive tract and that scavenge, it's the same. You know, unfortunately, the misconception is we get a lot of birds in that are shot, being shot in the breast muscle, and if you shoot something at being a nuisance, if you will, or which all birds are federally protected, so. But unfortunately, there are those that do that, and you know, being shot physically is not the cause of lead toxicosis. It's for lead toxicity. It is usually the bullet itself is encapsulated in muscle, and if that bird died from that, then something would have to consume that piece of muscle with that lead fragment in it. If the bird that died, where you saw the slides that Tom had put up, where there's large fragments in the digestive tract of eagles that died, those were starting to break down to, if the eagle became toxic and died, those are starting to break down. Had that bird died and were found by a different bird that scavenged on it, absolutely, that is still lead. So until it's gone, it is still toxic. Whether or not the meat is, whether or not the meat is going to kill it, or what's in the bloodstream is going to kill it, but the fragments themselves are the toxin.
Can I just make a comment? I wasn't perfectly clear on the question. When the question seemed to imply that these birds were in someone's possession and disposed of. If it's an eagle, the carcasses are not disposed of. They go into a federal repository to give to Native American tribes. So no lead-killed eagles that are found, or eagle parts, are disposed of where something would be exposed to their bodies.
Thank you. Another question for our panelists. Do you see New York State implementing a lead ammo restriction?
I've seen no efforts to do that in any organizations I'm familiar with. Some of the anti-hunting groups have made some noise. They're kind of using this as a red herring, but I don't think there's any chance that there will be any kind of restriction on using lead ammo in New York State.
I have to agree. I think this is all going to be a voluntary basis, sadly enough.
Okay.
I just would like to make a comment about the voluntary basis. We're landowners, as I mentioned, and we asked our hunters who we welcomed to our farm to consider using non-lead ammo last year, because this was the first I'd been learning of this. And they are very willing. They did ask that they have time to research it, time to work, how they were going to do it, practice with their guns and the non-lead ammo. And they've been back preparing for this fall, and they are very excited to use non-lead ammo. So I would really encourage any landowners to, talk to your hunters and see if it's something that they would consider.
Well, I was just going to say that a lot of the ed programs that I do, we have the swap out the lead program where the police departments also, when they're dispatching deer, this is not putting blame on anybody. This is just a reality. If the deer or whatever wildlife must be put down, they too it's a traffic safety, public safety, or just for the fact that the animal is, gravely injured. So they're put down as well on scene with lead fragments in them. And, it's different. They're shooting 40 and 45 hollow points. The fragmentation's a bit different, but it's not. It's the same idea. If not, there's more, because it's not supposed to go through and through like your rifle calibers. So yeah, we have the same thing. Just some of the police departments, it's a voluntary thing that they said, yeah, if we have to dispatch wildlife, and FFF buys those bullets, and they carry a different magazine so that if they have to put a deer down, then something we're not leaving that contamination in the wild. But as far as landowners, a lot of people I talk to, they're like, well, we have, similar to Tom, sometimes it's farmers, sometimes it's people who let, because they have an abundance of deer on their property, and they do let people handed down generations, when they hunt properties for years. And they said, well, we just kind of gave them the restriction. We don't mind as long as you do this, that, and that is to shoot copper. And it's worked for a lot. So, like I said, it wasn't you can't hunt here if you don't shoot copper. It was, this is why. And everybody who takes a minute to to actually try and understand what the message here. There's no confrontation. It's those who, the confrontation is usually just based upon not getting the big picture.
Yeah, and if I could add something on there too, I think that our DEC should be doing more. They've got quite a bit of stuff on their website, but they should start with their employees, giving their employees non-lead ammunition. At one point they said, I remember it was a cost issue, but it's not a huge cost issue anymore. And as setting an example, they should be the ones now, hey, we're going to give all our law enforcement, we're going to give all our wildlife people non-lead ammunition, and we're going to lead by example here. But, I don't see that happening yet, and I'm not sure why DEC isn't stepping up to the plate there.
No, even permission to shoot a different bullet would be a start.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what I said. Hopefully this reaches old Andy boy up in Albany there, and he gives the state police permission too, because
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. We have another question. So I missed the beginning of this presentation. Is it being recorded? And if so, how can I get a copy of it? I'd like to be able to pass it on to others. And it is being recorded. And I think Susan will probably be able to give you information about how you can look at the recording and get this information that you missed earlier in the presentation. She's our technical whiz. I'm not, so I'll leave that to her. She'll be able to contact you later. Are there other questions or other comments from panelists at this point? I'm not seeing new questions popping up. See that? There is a question. So our next question is there anything we can do to help allow different types of ammunition? So I think you're asking, are there ways we might encourage either the development or distribution of different types of ammo? Is that a correct interpretation?
I'm not sure that I understood the question on there. The ban on California, though it's been very controversial, has forced many manufacturers. There are a lot more manufacturers now producing non-lead ammunition. And the listener before that wanted to know if he could get a copy of this. I hope that the one thing that he does get, if he's interested in this, is huntingwithnonlead.org. That's the site that they've got videos, they've got scientific studies on there. They talk about the condors, lots of links to different ammunition, how it shoots differently. So I hope that he looks at that site. But in terms of encouraging people, I think asking, if you're a landowner, ask people, yeah, please, if you're going to hunt here, use non-lead ammunition. I think that maybe on public lands. Ask DEP. DEP has some, 150,000 acres that's been opened up to the public. Write letters to DEP and say, how about if you ask hunters hunting on your property on DEP land, have them use non-lead ammunition? I mean, there's certain things, write to your legislators and ask them to encourage that, maybe on lands that are open, state lands that are open to hunting. I don't want to open up a can of worms, but those are ways you can encourage that.
You have to deal with enforcement, that's why. So that
Well,
gets into
Michael's talking about regs. He's talking about education and encouragement, right?
education, yeah.
Yes. And there was a lot of pushback when, they asked people to switch to non-lead for hunting waterfowl. There's a huge pushback on that. And that's a matter of enforcement there, but they do enforce it. I don't think duck hunters I don't think they think twice anymore about what they're supposed to be doing.
Absolutely.
Tom, or do we have information on our website too that might be a starting point for people that are trying to learn a little bit more about this subject?
There is some information on our website. I think the DEC website has some excellent information. DEC also promotes the use of non-lead ammunition regularly in the regulations book and on their website occasionally in the New York State Conservationist and through other media contacts. But I would suggest that would be the best place to start if you want general information on lead ammo or non-lead ammo in New York State. DEC used to have a list of different brands of ammo that were non-lead. Because sometimes when you go into a store and you look at the shelves, this is particularly true if you go in a place like Bass Pro Shops, there's so much ammunition on the shelf, they don't put the non-lead ammunition by itself. It's just mixed in. All the 30-06 ammunition is all thrown together, and you have to go through every box and try and find the non-lead stuff. So DEC, to help with that, created a list of non-lead bullets. So you could just print that out and take it to the store with you and find it.
Yeah, another resource that is on the Audubon website is a video that we produced 2 or 3 years ago. Has some of the similar information that was presented tonight, but it's very well done. It's very watchable, and I think that would be worthwhile viewing for anyone that's interested in the subject. I think it runs about 20 minutes or so.
Thank you. We have another question, and any panelist who wants to jump in, please feel free to do so. The question is this an effort to control what ammunition people use?
No, it's an educational effort. It's an effort to get hunters to understand their choices and how it affects wildlife and human health.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think that anybody's trying to force anybody to do anything here, but if they just look at that, you know, what's going on with the lead, with what all these studies talk about on there, there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I've done a lot of gun shows and talked to a lot of hunters, and their hackles are up in the very beginning just because they think, you know, this is trying to force something upon them. But it's not. If you just look at the science here, if you believe the science, just look at the science. Nobody wants to be killing eagles. Like Missy said, there's an awful lot of suffering that goes on. I mean, it almost makes you want to cry for no reason. It's a simple fix on there. It has nothing to do with taking away our guns or reducing the number of hunters or anything like that. It has, it's not related to that at all. It's just about choosing something that we know better now. We used to put asbestos.
Exactly.
Yeah, we used to have asbestos shingles on our house.
It's just something that we've learned over the years. That the one other thing that we've used from, you know, used for centuries, and you say, hey, you know what, we could have probably done better, but this is what it does now, and we can change it, you know, in this situation. Nobody's taking my guns. Nobody's telling me what bullet I can put in there to target shoot, or for that matter, shoot some guy walking in my house. And nobody cares if I shoot him with lead or copper. I'm not putting him outside to be consumed. But if I'm going to be in the woods, then you're just a better steward now that we know, you know.
Pete, I was just reading the questions, and there was a clarification of an earlier question where the person wanted to know how they could get involved, how they could help. And I just wanted to speak to that. I sell Christmas trees, and because I sell Christmas trees, I talk to hundreds of hunters. They're all coming in. It's deer season. They've got their camo on, and I would say probably I've converted more people to non-lead ammo with one-on-one conversations than I have with probably 20 public presentations and a couple of conferences I've done. So talk to your friends, talk to fellow hunters. My property, it's all non-lead. My brother's got a farm over by Norwich. People ask him if they can hunt. He says the first rule is you got to use non-lead ammo. You can hunt on my property. So you can influence people by, one by one by one. Okay, sorry for the interruption, but I wanted to make sure that got covered.
I want to go back to something Missy just said that was the first time it was said tonight, is that the hunters are the stewards. And that has been the case for a very, very long time. And yeah, as hunters, yeah, they need to step up to the plate now and say, hey, listen, this is just about doing something better for all the wildlife out there. Some hunters, I know when I've done the gun shows, some hunters have said, well, you know what, I've seen more hawks and eagles around now. You look at the eagle population is up. Yes, it is. There's a lot more eagles now than there were in the 70s, that's for sure. But at the same time, we aren't going to say, well, just because there's more eagles, we're not worried about poisoning the ones just because it's not going to affect the population. We're not going to allow poachers. You know, we've got lots of deer in my valley, but we're not going to say, well, it's not going to affect the population much if we allow poachers. We don't do that. There's a matter of ethics there.
But if anybody, if you know, look who I'm talking to, but you know birds, and every time I hear the statement, well, eagles have made such a comeback, there's so many now, and just as easily, actually it wasn't easy at all, but just as many as you see today. I mean, you look at the increase in hunting licenses that was sold this year alone, because of COVID, everybody's free and took their hunting classes online. And if DEC stays that way, then of course, as more hunters are out there, then this what? How fast do you think it'll take, before I'm overwhelmed with lead toxic eagles that I may or may not be able to save, and the population dwindled again because it is that toxic? Today it's an eagle. I mean, I had January to, what was it, Michael? January to beginning of April, I had 22 red tails and all tested high leads. And because we tested. So it was like from the end of November into January, there was 22 of them. On top of that, eagles and whatever. So, I mean, the fact that we have too many or so many, it could disappear just as fast as it rose.
We have a couple of questions, basically asking if there really are people who don't know that lead is poisonous. And I think probably our answer is that while people probably do know that it's poisonous, they might not be aware of how it is dispersed in the environment into these eagles, other birds, earthworms, which then can be consumed by things. It's in insects. So I think it's not so much they don't understand or haven't heard, but maybe are not aware of really the widespread environmental implications of lead in ammunition. Are others, Tom, you've been doing education programs, are there comments about kind of the public awareness of lead and its toxicity, either in people or wildlife?
When I'm out in the public, and most of the presentations I've done are on raptor conservation, and lead is part of it. Most of the people, I believe, in the present, Missy, could you mute for a minute? We're getting a lot of feedback from you for a moment. Thank you. At the presentations, I think there's a much higher awareness of the lead and ammunition issue. When I deal with people one-on-one, there's an astounding amount of unawareness by some hunters. And a lot of them also express an attitude like, we've been doing this for hundreds of years with lead, and it was never a problem before, but that's not true. We just hadn't been aware of the problem. First of all, prior to the 20th century, what was being used was black powder, which bullets moved with black powder, shot with black powder, are very slow and they don't fragment as much. But we don't have baseline data on how many eagles were dying back then. And one of the comments about the numbers of eagles, if you look at the graphs of the increasing number of lead-poisoned eagles, it's astounding how it's going up, but also that matches the population too. When there was no eagles in New York State, there were no lead-poisoned eagles in New York State. So, but yes, there is a fair amount of ignorance. You may be surprised. People don't realize that these bullets fragment and send particles of lead up to 14 inches from the entry wound into the meat. They put it in a grinder, it smears it into the meat, and you get a huge amount of surface area, and you feed it to your kids. So, yes.
Okay, so I think if I haven't missed anything, we've covered all the questions and comments that we've received. I want to thank Susan O'Hanley for her technical support. She's behind the scenes, but she's doing an awful lot for us. Charlie Scheim and Andy Mason, our moderators, thank you for your help tonight. And thank everyone who attended our discussion. We hope that you've learned a little bit about the effects of environmental lead from ammunition. We hope that you look into more information and maybe if you're a hunter, consider making a change to non-lead ammunition. There are contacts on the Delaware Otsego Audubon Society website. If you have other questions, I'm sure you could send them through that email address and somebody can get back to you with an answer as well.